So continuation of 3.2, we're going to talk a little bit more about the intermediate value theorem. This is used to find zeros. And so what's going to happen here is I want to find some x value that I can plug in and get a positive number. But then when I turn around and plug in another number, I get a negative answer. So on this particular one right here, let's say I wanted to know the value of f of, and I don't really know, so I'm just going to go -1. So if I plugged in a -1, that would be -1 cubed minus -1 squared plus 1. And what do I get? -1 cubed would be -1. -1 squared would be +1. So I got -1 minus 1, which is -2. Plus 1 gives me -1. What about if I plugged in f of 0? Well, f of 0, I just ignore the x cubed and the x squared terms, right? And I'm left with 1. So when x is -1, I get a negative number. But when x is 0, I get a positive number, which means there must be a 0 between -1 and 0. And if I wanted to, I could even get closer. Someone with the calculator. I want f of -0.5. You see what I just did there? I cut this in half, right? I'm trying to kind of narrow down to see where that 0 is. So if I plug in -0.5 into this function, what do we get? A positive? 0.625. Okay, so now what I know is there's a 0. It's actually between -1/2 and -1. Does that make sense? Okay, f of -0.75. .15. Okay. 0.15. Okay, so we're pretty close to it right there. But now notice that there's a 0 between these two numbers, right? So but it's between -0.75 and -1. So that just allows, and we could get closer and closer and closer. You know, we know that -0.75 is pretty close. Now we might want to try maybe -0.8 or maybe -0.9. So that's what the intermediate value theorem does. It allows us to get closer and closer and closer to what the 0 is. Okay? Questions on that? Snap it if you want it. I'm going to clear everything on the screen so you can see what the book has on here. Y'all good? So we'd have to try something else, right? Yeah. And so here's some points that they plugged in. They plugged in -2, -1, 0, and found out that here we are between these two values. I'm moving to the next slide. They tried -0.8 and got -0.152. They tried -0.7 and got 0.167. So what does that tell you? It's between -0.8 and -0.7, right? So that's the whole concept of the intermediate value theorem. If you put it into the calculator and look at it, you would see that, yes, it is over there between -0.8 and -0.7. And you could actually use your calculator and find out what it is, couldn't you? Calculate the 0. Calculate the 0 with your calculator. Okay. For a more accurate approximation, we could even plug in more numbers and we could keep going to get as close as we wanted to. All right, I'm going to stop it right there and we'll jump into 3.3.